Welcome, everybody, to First Friday Club with Joel Naoum. We're delighted that you've joined us today for the third in our online First Friday series presented via Zoom. My name is Lou Garcia-Dolnick, and I am the Membership and Administration Officer here at Writing New South Wales. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this event is being transmitted and recorded, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We also extend our acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of all the peoples on whose lands you're joining us from. In these tumultuous and unprecedented new set of circumstances we find ourselves in, it's especially important now as ever to consider and honour the knowledges, learnings and storytelling traditions of First Nations peoples, as well as recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. We're especially excited to hear on whose lands you're Zooming from and invite you to let us know via the chat box on the bottom of your screen. I'll also release a poll shortly with a few more questions so we can learn a bit about you. When you open the chat box, you'll also notice that we've included a handy list of tips and instructions for using Zoom. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, we invite you to do so via the chat as well. We'll be taking all your questions and presenting them to David to ask Joel during the Q&A at the end of the event. Please feel welcome to chat to your fellow attendees and incite conversation throughout the discussion. I'll release that poll for you to complete now. You'll be muted for the whole event to ensure the best possible sound quality. Let us know also via the chat if you're having any trouble hearing our speakers or are having any technical issues, and we'll do our best to help you out. When in doubt, the best possible solution is to exit the Zoom meeting by clicking Leave Meeting at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and clicking on the link to this meeting again. To see our speakers, toggle your screen to Speaker View in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom window. To see all other attendees, toggle your view to Gallery View. We recommend you stay on speaker view for the entirety of the event. We're recording this event, so if you drop out or have to leave early, you can always watch it on our website later next week. I now welcome Writing New South Wales Business and Property Manager, David Henley.
Hi, everybody. I'm the business manager here at Writing New South Wales, and today I get to talk to Joel, who I've known for a long time. A little bit about Joel, if you don't know him already. Joel is a Sydney-based book publisher, bookseller, editor, and consultant. He is currently the non-fiction category manager at Booktopia and runs Critical Mass Consulting, a publishing consultancy. Joel previously ran Pan Macmillan's Australia's digital first imprint Momentum, and he is also chair of Writing New South Wales. And in 2011, he completed the Unwin Trust Fellowship researching digital publishing experimentation in the United Kingdom. Joel, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
There's almost too many areas to cover, so we'll just see how we go. Firstly, you're with Booktopia now. What exactly is your job as non-fiction category manager?
So it's my first job on the other side of the book world, the retail side, and category manager is a job in retailing. It's a standard job in retailing that basically means you're the sort of responsible person for that area of the business.
But Booktopia's online. What kind of retailing are you doing?
Yeah, so there's still quite a lot of work that goes into making the books. So a big part of my job is just making sure that we have stock for all the books that we want to buy, and that even though we list on Booktopia every book that is possibly available, we don't stock all of those books. So I'm the one making the decision what non-fiction books we decide to stock in our warehouse, and making sure that we keep them in stock, which is sometimes quite difficult. So there's a lot of management of that. Another big part of being a category manager is like owning the sort of marketing. I don't do the marketing myself necessarily, but I'm choosing, for example, what books go into newsletters that promoting books, what books we put into campaigns when we're deciding to do a campaign for something to promote something. So there's a lot of, I'm basically the non-fiction book expert who is in charge of deciding what books we promote, what books we stock, and making sure that things look good on the website when it comes to non-fiction. I'm specifically looking at nonfiction trade, which I have another colleague that looks after the lifestyle books, so the sort of more illustrated coffee table books, art and photography, that kind of thing, and another colleague who looks after nonfiction professional. So they look after textbooks and stuff. So I don't do that.
Right. That's sounding like a big company now. How many employees has Booktopia got?
I actually don't know how many, but I know quite a few people who used to work there when there was only like 10 people there. So it's grown a huge amount in a short time. But even since I've been here now for just over a year and a half, I think, and it's grown already in that time. Like our team has grown by half, I think, since I've been here. So yeah, it's growing very fast.
So where are you sitting right now? Is this your Booktopia office?
No, this is my bedroom. I like many people at the moment, are working from home. Our office is in Lidcombe in Western Sydney, along with our warehouse. It's attached to the warehouse. I was obviously commuting there every day, but at the moment, most of the people who work at Booktopia's in the office area are working from home. It's open, technically, the office, so there are some people there, and some people who pop in and out, but I've just decided to stay working from home for the moment because I can, and easy enough.
Has it affected operations much, the shutdown?
It has, yeah. Probably the biggest effect has just been the delays caused by shipping. There are a lot more people are buying things online, and a lot more, shipping is happening. A lot of people are getting packages, so that's clogged up the works. And then on top of that is just the added pressure of trying to keep things sanitized. And we were, as a precaution, we had for a while our warehouse split into two teams, that those teams would never be on a shift at the same time. So that would mean that if one shift got someone got infected, they would be able to take that whole shift off and still have a workforce to be able to run the warehouse, so that the whole warehouse didn't have to shut down. Thankfully, that nobody has been diagnosed, which is great. So we've been able to keep working the whole time.
Oh, right. So how has Booktopia fared? It being an online retailer, and many other online retailers have been absolutely killing it. How's Booktopia doing?
The same, I think. It's the silver lining to what has obviously been an incredibly difficult thing for a lot of people, but people are certainly buying a lot of books, and we are up, 100%, 150% up on last year in some cases, depending on the week and what's selling. So it's a huge difference. I don't expect it to persist forever at that level, but certainly during the initial period after lockdown, there was a huge increase that lasted for a couple of months.
And I guess with so many other bookstores closing, people had to go somewhere.
Yep, and we're not back to normal yet. There's still a lot of people who are buying from us who weren't before.
Do you see any interesting sales trends happening, like bread making?
Well, yeah, I think the trend to begin with was definitely towards fiction and kids. Okay. And the fiction trend has continued. Fiction is way up on last year, just in general. And particularly in the early period, it was by far the highest. It went skyrocketing up. And then a lot of kids and kids educational product really well, presumably because a lot of people were locked at home with their kids and were looking for things to entertain them with. We sold a lot of puzzles, which we hadn't necessarily been selling before in huge numbers because we are a bookshop primarily. But
that's a hard thing to get out of reprint.
Exactly, we got hold of a lot of puzzles, and we sold a lot of puzzles. And that was the early part of the lockdown, and then as it continued, non-fiction and lifestyle books started selling much better. So in my area, that was partially just about a lot of people buying very specific books that were selling really well. But that changed over time, and we had now we have a lot of books that are selling bread making books and that kind of gardening books, that type of thing are selling in the later part. And then, you know, in the last month, we've had the reaction to the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in the US and around the world, have had a huge impact on my area of nonfiction sales, with people buying a lot of books on that topic.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully those trends will continue. Do you see Amazon as being a big threat to Booktopia?
I mean, they're probably the biggest threat to Booktopia. Booktopia is, as far as we know, definitely the biggest online bookseller in Australia. We have a pretty big, between about 10 and 20% of the market on any given week at the moment. That may change and may decrease as people stop buying as much online, but that's where we're at. We were above 10% before this happened. And although we trend towards selling stuff, you know, backlist rather than frontlist, because obviously bookshops don't tend to have as much older books in their shops, whereas we can stock a lot more stuff. Amazon has been slow to take off in Australia for, I don't know, a lot of reasons, probably partially just their own priorities. And I think they've just not been prioritizing books in the same way that they might have otherwise done, which might change. They may decide to massively invest in books and therefore try and take our market share away. But I think Booktopia has been a pretty well developed, mature online company. So I think Amazon sees probably a lot more low hanging fruit elsewhere.
Well, it's Booktopia is a much nicer website to use. But so can you go into some of the other things that Booktopia is starting to do? Because it's not just a book retailer anymore.
Yeah, so it's not areas that I'm specifically working in, but we have branched into being a book distributor as well. Through we have a service called BPS, Booktopia Publishing Services, I believe, which distributes books for smaller and larger publishers, as well as some indie authors as well. So we've got relationships with other bookstores, and we distribute books to those bookshops around the country.
You're distributing to bookshops?
Yeah, to bookshops, and obviously selling through our store as well, the same books. I believe it started because there are a couple of overseas academic publishers primarily who sold a lot of books through the market, and particularly through Booktopia, and they were looking for a distributor in Australia and didn't necessarily have easy access to one. There's not really much of a third-party distributor culture in Australia for books, print books, overseas, not in the US and the UK.
Yeah, the fall of Dennis Jones and others.
Exactly. So Dennis Jones was a third-party distributor, but quite small and focused on primarily on indie authors, whereas in the US and the UK, there are lots of big third-party distributors that distribute smaller presses, and it makes it easier for smaller publishers and indie authors to get their books into bookshops.
Right. So does Booktopia work with? Does Booktopia work with independent authors? I know it's not your area.
We do. BPS definitely has. We definitely have some indie authors that we distribute. Some of which came to us from Dennis Jones at the time that happened. It's a case-by-case basis situation as far as I understand it. We also have a new part of the business called Booktopia Editions and the Book Club, Booktopia Book Club, both of which are publishing arms. So we're publishing new books. So a lot of them are rights buys from overseas books that don't have a local publisher. Booktopia only sells to Australia and New Zealand, so we can. There are lots and lots of books out there that were quite successful, or might have a market here in Australia that overseas publishers, local publishers, haven't been interested in buying the rights to. So in those cases, we're in a position to potentially buy the rights. So we've been doing a bit of that. I haven't had anything to do with that part of the business, but I know it's happening.
It's interesting. So Booktopia's retailing, distributing, and now publishing. How do you see? I mean, I know you're not running the company, but how do you see Booktopia sitting in the ecology of the book world?
Well, I mean, I think compared to someone like Amazon, Amazon's interest is in selling stuff to people and getting it to them quickly, and running huge, their efficiencies are in physical distribution of products, any product. And their first product just happened to be books, but it could be anything. And they're optimizing for that. So they have these huge distribution warehouses where you can buy, whatever product you want in a cart along with a book. So they're more on I guess, a replacement for your discount department store online. Whereas I think Booktopia conceives of itself more as an online independent bookshop. We are not necessarily trying to compete with deep discounted department stores or Amazon in that space, but we do have a lot more contact with publishers and contact with authors. So we do we do signings on site, or we used to before we had to lock down. And we do a lot of content. We have a dedicated person who's paid to blog, and we have a lot of content that comes directly from authors. We have a dedicated social media team, and all of our teams work pretty closely with local publishers to try and, I guess, integrate stuff and work with them to make the local books work well here. Whereas my sense of Amazon is that that's not really happening with them, that they're more likely to automate, I guess, the processes that and not necessarily work in an analog way with publishers and authors to get things done.
Maybe not an active way, just let the algorithm do it. An
active way, yeah. I don't mean to criticize them. They have their place. But I think it's really healthy that Australia has Booktopia. Before I worked here, I felt I didn't really know how Booktopia sat in the marketplace. But now that I know, and that we're growing so fast, it's nice. I think it's really healthy for the industry to not just have Amazon as an online bookseller, because that has certainly happened in the UK and the US, where there isn't really a local competitor to Amazon in the same way. Amazon has a huge percentage of the online sales market in the UK and the US. And that's, at this stage in Australia, not the case. We are bigger than Amazon. And while we may not always be that, I hope we will. But I definitely can conceive of a very healthy marketplace for a different type of book selling online.
Well, at least Booktopia contributes to the community. It's as Run New South Wales are thrilled that Booktopia is sponsoring the Boundless Mentorship. Can you tell us more about that program?
Yeah, it was really exciting. I mostly just helped the introduction happen with our CEO, rather than as the chair of Writing New South Wales. I felt that I should try and connect people who wanted to spend money on things to people who needed the money. And in this case, the Indigenous mentorship, it seems like it aligned very closely with what Booktopia is doing. So we sell a huge amount of books to schools, and a lot of books just in general to customers who are interested in First Nations issues. A lot of First Nations authors, a lot of just books about First Nations topics. And it makes up a pretty significant percentage of what we sell, and it's a growing trend, I guess, in publishing. That we've seen huge sales for books like Dark Emu, for example, that have just sold amazingly well lately, and in the last 12 months. And it's really nice to see. I just feel like it's an area that Booktopia does well in, and that we care about, like the people who work here care about it, and it seemed aligned with with our values. And so I thought that the CEO would be interested, and he was. So that worked out really well. I'm really happy that we're getting on board with it.
Yeah, it's really great, and it's really nice that Booktopia actually contributes back to the broader publishing world. Now, just switching a little bit, because you've been one of the big parts of your life was momentum. You're basically at the cutting edge of an ebook e-only publishing. Where do you see ebooks now? What happened to ebooks?
Ebooks didn't go anywhere. I mean, I think ebooks have changed a bit. in the past couple of years, from an area that large publishers were investing a lot of money into, to something that they now just take for granted. They built their systems for producing ebooks, and they just produce ebook versions just like any other format of a book. They don't think about it necessarily all that much. They have people inside publishing houses whose job it is to make sure that the metadata is correct. Overall, there's a trend towards selling online, be it in ebook or in print format. So publishers are more focused on making sure that things like metadata are good, in a way that wasn't the case when I first set up Momentum and first got interested in ebooks. Publishers didn't care about that stuff, and they care about that stuff a lot now, and it has a positive impact on ebooks as well as on print books.
Is anyone still doing that e-first sort of plan that Momentum was driving?
Yeah, look, I don't know of any. I mean, some of the, certainly, Momentum technically still exists. And there are still some ebook first authors that come out. I think the model in general is hard to sustain for a large publisher. They have a lot bigger overheads than independent authors, and essentially what you're doing with a ebook first model is trying to compete with independent authors, indie authors who are self-publishing, and that's really hard to do with the overheads that a publisher has. If you want to produce really good books with proper editing, you're really running at a loss at the price points that you can ask for. If you're competing in that space, the books are much cheaper. So it's a lot harder for a publisher to do that, and that's ultimately where we ended up with Momentum. That we produced a lot of really high quality books, but we were probably on track eventually to make a profit, but we weren't making a profit when I left.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was a lot of hard work. Everyone was burning out, and I think we felt ultimately that it was going to be not necessarily worth the investment to keep running it at that level. I think it was a fantastic thing. I'm still really proud of the work I did there. But then when I left Momentum, it was to start my consultancy, which I've primarily been working with self-published authors, independent authors, in trying to sort of professionalize that part of the self-publishing industry as much as I can, bring the skill set that I have to helping independent authors publish more professionally. There are a lot of independent authors who publish professionally on their own and do not need my help.
Now might be a good time to release those poll results, Lou. There was a self-publishing question in there.
I don't see the poll, but
you don't see it's just come up for me. So have you been buying more or fewer books? 54% have been buying more books, 4% fewer books, 43% have been buying about the same books. Question 2 was, are you a published author? If so, what publication outcome did you pursue for your book? So 18% yes have self-published their book, 25% published their book through a traditional publisher, 4% published their book through a hybrid publisher, and 54% not yet. Also,
that's interesting.
Well, who have you been buying books from during the pandemic? 39% local bookshops, 36% online, 18% international online bookstores such as Book Depository. Did you want to say anything about Book Depository, Joel?
No, not really. I mean, they're a part of the industry now. They exist.
But Amazon owns them, right?
Yeah, Amazon owns them, so they're part of Amazon basically. I'm not sure if everyone realizes that. They're cheap. They're not necessarily very. They don't differ from Amazon in the sense that they aren't very pro-author or pro-publisher.
No, they're not really part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, they're publishers. They're selling books as cheap as they can possibly get them, sometimes at a loss, to customers, which is very customer focused, which is a very good thing for companies to have. But it's sometimes at the cost of cutting a smaller chunk of the book will go to the author in some cases. When you're buying the international edition of a local author's book, less of that money from the sale goes to the author, basically, in most cases.
Yeah. So all this experience has led you to critical mass and your publishing consultancy, and you've got a self-publishing course coming up. Why is it called self-publishing now, and it used to be called vanity publishing?
I think I tend to call it independent publishing now, indie publishing, even more fancy and professional than self-publishing. But yeah, it's the same thing basically. I think the reason is because it's not about vanity anymore. I don't know if it. I think basically in a lot of cases it was primarily about publishing something because you wanted to have something as a book. Back in the days when it was commonly called vanity publishing, but it's just not the case anymore. That's the reason for most people doing it. I think I don't think there is a unifying reason why people self-publish. So the motivation for doing it is not part of the explanation, not part of the descriptor for what it is. It's self-publishing. That's all it is. You happen to be publishing yourself and independently, and there's a whole scope of different types of publishing that happens under that name. From vanity publishing, which is perfectly acceptable type of publishing as far as I can see. A lot of people just want to have their life story or a memoir about something they did, and they want to see it in printed format, and they want to be able to give it to their friends and family. That's a perfectly acceptable. I don't see why those people shouldn't make books. They can make books.
Do you think the stigmas disappeared then? Because I mean, when I entered the book world, working in the bigger publishers, the idea of it was always called vanity published then was very poo-pooed upon. Do you think most authors are okay now? It's totally legitimate?
No, it's not totally legitimate, but it's a very wide. I don't think you can just say, oh, he's self-published and that means a particular thing anymore. I think in some cases, someone who is really successfully self-published is very desirable to a traditional publisher because they know how to promote themselves in a way that's very useful to a publisher who largely does depend on an author promoting themselves nowadays. But it runs the gamut. Like if you've been a really unsuccessful self-publisher, having your books out there that look really bad doesn't look good to a traditional publisher. So I don't think there's a blanket rule for what self-publishers seem like to a traditional publisher or to a customer.
Yeah, I mean,
I do think
go on. Sorry.
I do think readers think differently about self-publishers. I think there's a readership for books that are really cheap, whether they're self-published or traditionally published, and those readers tend not to have a problem with self-publishing at all. But outside of that, there's a traditional book readership who will not touch a $1 book, full stop, and they will not read a self-published book. They don't have the time or the inclination or the energy to go looking for it and find what to read. And those markets are quite separate.
Do you think, why do they think that? The impression that it won't be as high quality?
Yeah, I guess so. People are time poor, and people are traditional as well. So they a lot of people, the way that they find books is purely by word of mouth. And in a lot of traditional book categories, there isn't a huge amount of crossover with books that are self-published. And so self-publishing tends to concentrate around areas where it works regardless. So romance, science fiction, fantasy, genre fiction in general, where there's like a loud and proud and big community online who can share word of mouth about books that they discover, whether or not they're self-published. And there's also like a very voracious appetite for those books amongst the readers. And so they're willing to go beyond the traditionally published books to find what they are looking for. Whereas I think there's a lot of people who make the book industry function who buy 1 or 2 books a year, and they only buy those books from authors they've already heard of or have already read. And those readers are never going to go and just buy a $1 ebook on Amazon or elsewhere. So it's just a different type of reader.
How can authors flourish when, I mean, you hear different figures bouncing around, but it's like 5,000 books entering the market every month. I think that's just to bookstores. How can independent authors find an audience now?
Yeah, at least 5,000. I look at probably about 1,000 or more books just in my category a month to decide which books that will stock. And that definitely does not include ebooks, because you don't have to decide whether to stock those, you get them regardless. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff being published. So what was your question? How do people stand out?
Yeah, how can anybody stand out with that sort of crowd?
Look, I don't think it's really about standing out from a group of 5,000 books a month anymore and being one book among 5,000 that everyone knows about. I think, particularly when it comes to indie publishing, it's about finding your audience. And that audience might be quite small. You don't actually have to sell that many books to that many people to make a decent income from self-publishing. When you think about the fact that your audience is global and you pocket the entire amount of the money that you make, you know, there's a couple of writers who talk about your sort of 100 true fans or 1,000 true fans, and depending on how much product you sell, and I use product in a very specific way because it's not just books. You know, it might be events, courses, all sorts of things that you might sell off the back of your publishing. Then you can make a living off doing. Then you can make a living off doing that. But if you are looking for the kind of experience that you get from a traditional publisher, where you are lauded, not that every author who's published traditionally gets lauded, but you know, where you have some sort of like critical acceptance by, you know, the gatekeepers of culture, which a lot of people, that's what they want from the publishing experience, even regardless of whether they sell anything. What they want is to be recognized. That is not something you get out of self-publishing, really, generally speaking. You can find an audience almost as easily as you can find an audience with a traditional publisher, but you can't necessarily replicate the same. It's just a different type of publishing. And so I would say that the question is not like, how do you stand out amongst 5,000? It's like, how do you reach your audience? How do you find your audience?
That's a nice one. That's
nice. Narrow casting rather than broadcasting.
Yeah. Okay. So talking to new authors or potential authors, what are the most common mistakes self-published or independent published authors make?
I think pacing. Pacing is the issue. I think self-published authors, in my experience, often rush through things they shouldn't rush, and then slow things way down when they shouldn't slow down.
Like, you mean editorial? I cannot read my own book ever again. It's the 30th time.
Yeah, that sometimes they slow way down, but that's not, you know, that's fine. It hasn't been published yet. My experience is that they rush through the final stages of the book just when it is almost ready to be published, and as soon as it's ready, they put it out without thinking about how they're going to promote it or who it's going to sell to or anything about how that book is going to reach its audience. Whereas really, I would advocate for a model in which you get the book completely ready, and during the process of getting it ready, you spend a lot of time thinking about who the audience is. That should be a prime part of designing a cover, for example. And then when the book is completely finished and ready, you put the book up for pre-order, and then you start thinking about reaching an audience. And you give yourself a few months to go out there and promote it and think about who you're going to pitch to. And the whole time that you're doing that activity, the book is there and available to pre-order, but not to buy. You get a huge first mover's advantage with a new author and a new book when their book first comes out. Most of the online retailers give you a little bit of an extra push in their automatic algorithms when the book is first released. And if you've got some sales behind you before the book is released, then that gives you even more of a push. Booktopia, for example, we spend a lot of time on pushing pre-orders, not pushing sales. After the book is out, there's another 5,000 books to look at. Whereas if the book is
people are more interested before a book comes out.
People at my end are, and generally speaking, we are only interested in the books before they come out, and then once they're out, we have a very short window of time that we can continue to look at them. Whereas if a book starts selling well before it's even out, then it indicates something about the book. For one thing, it's guaranteed sales. So you're more likely to then invest in the book. You know, you will put promotion behind the book. You'll buy more stock of the book. If it's print, obviously. And it just becomes more noticeable. Once the book is out, it has to sell so many copies once it's out to be noticed, you know. I don't think that your ultimate aim as a self-publisher should be to sell thousands of copies before the book comes out. That's not going to happen for the majority of people. But I do think just taking some time to think about it before the book is already out is really, really worthwhile. And not many authors do it.
Well, one of the things authors, you know, I was once an author. The worst thing is self-promote. I'm a submerged author, Joel.
Yeah.
No, that's totally. Promotion is the worst. I'm just, you know, it's the hardest thing to keep flogging your own book. How do you do it?
I think it's one of those questions that is not answerable. If I'm being brutally honest about it, it's like how long is a piece of string? Or Garth Nix. I was once on a panel with Garth Nix, and he said the answer to every question in book publishing is it depends. I think that's probably true. I do think it's not about flogging your book necessarily. It's about building a platform upon which people will want to buy your book just by your presence.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it doesn't work as well for a lot of authors, because authors aren't always that extroverted or interested in other people's approval or interested in talking to people even. So I do think this new way of publishing certainly preferences people who are good at digital and, you know, online social media, basically. If you're very good at making those connections and networking and being generous with your time with other authors, then you're more likely to have that favor repaid to you and to have your book amplified when it comes out. That's the way I think about it. I don't think about it as sitting there tweeting, buy my book every 2 hours for the first 2 weeks that your book is available. It's about having the connections with enough other authors and bookie people to, ultimately it's quite a closed system. You know, the people who buy books and write books and publish books are often all the same people. So, and there's not that many of us. Even, I mean, readers as well. There's not that many of us who read books in the scheme of things. So being aware of that is really, I think, a really important part of the process. And it doesn't mean you have to have some huge social media following, but I think it's about thinking about that audience part of it. Like, who are the people who are interested in what you're doing? They will help you amplify to the audience that you want to reach. So yeah, that's a very fluffy answer, but it's the most true answer I can give you, I think.
It was pretty good, though. You did use the dreaded word platform, which I think often comes up when authors go, do I have to have a platform? And what exactly is a platform now?
I also called books products earlier, which is a big no-no.
Oh, I missed that.
A platform. I mean, a platform is what it sounds like. You just, it's a something to raise you up and stand on so you can shout from other people.
Right.
Who has a bigger microphone? But again, it's partially, it's about, like I said earlier, narrow casting rather than broadcasting. You're not necessarily, like, I mean, we saw this with Momentum. We had a couple of our authors who got on like breakfast TV and stuff, you know, huge, hundreds of thousands of people watching. And it didn't necessarily move the needle in selling ebooks, you know. I think sometimes it can work for selling print books, but, you know, now that I'm at Booktopia, I see how books sell, like, in an immediate sense of whether something works to sell books. And there are certain types of broadcast media that work really well to sell books. You know, like Conversation with Richard Feidler, that radio show sells books like nothing else in Australia. If you get onto that show with a book, you will sell lots of books. It has to be a specific kind of book, but it will sell. But there are, you know, if you get on breakfast television, there's no guarantee that your book will sell, people who are watching breakfast television are not necessarily interested in what your book is about, and they might not be a reader. Whereas if you can find your audience that's really specific online, you can sell to a much bigger percentage of the people you're talking to, and it doesn't have to sound like you're just broadcasting out to everybody that you're, you know, you have a book.
I'll bring in the old dirty marketing of pull marketing versus push.
Exactly.
One more question before I jump to the audience questions. Just thought it's worth mentioning there are sort of predatory operators out there that encourage people to self-publish or independently publish for money. What sort of scams should authors be aware of?
That's a really good question, and something I care about a lot. And it's something I was really hyper aware of when I was setting up my consultancy, which unfortunately I'm barely able to spend time on anymore. So I can't help people in the way that I used to be able to, I think. There's nothing wrong with spending money to publish a book, for starters. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem comes when the person that you're trying to spend money with to publish your book is telling you that they are your publisher and that they will pay you a royalty. I think there is a merging of, you know, terms that can make things very complicated for people unless you're very aware of what those things mean. And most, particularly new authors, don't understand what those things mean. So a royalty, for example, is usually a certain percentage for traditionally published authors. But traditionally published authors usually get an advance and get all of the costs covered for publishing that book, and all the risk is borne by the publisher. And so therefore they get a much smaller percentage of the returns. If the person that you are publishing with is charging you for all of the costs of publishing the book, and maybe then some above that to make a profit, and then they're paying you a royalty that's only a small percentage of the sales, then you're in very, very dangerous water there. And what they're essentially doing is taking advantage of you. So it obviously varies case to case, but in general, be wary of people who tell you you have to pay and they still want you to refer to them as your publisher. You know, like, I don't call myself a publisher when I help my clients publish. I'm a consultant who helps them publish. They are the publisher.
Okay, well, I've got a bunch of audience questions if you're ready.
Yeah.
Firstly, so is it possible to pitch a book to Booktopia Book Club, i.e. a book that is already published?
This is a question I don't really know the answer to.
Okay.
At this point, as I understand it, most of the books that are coming across the radar of the publisher at Booktopia are through agents. So if you have an agent, by all means, you can pitch to Booktopia. But at this stage, I don't know of any way. I don't think he's opened up direct submissions yet. There's one guy, and he's quite overwhelmed, and it's fairly new. So it's difficult to read everything at this point.
To be confirmed then.
Yes.
What about things like comics for Booktopia? Do they sell comics?
Yeah, we sell graphic novels. We sell a lot of
graphic novels.
Yeah, graphic novels. We don't tend to. The reason being is that there is such a thing as comic books. That is a much more slender single issue, right? And the graphic novels are usually a bind up of those. That we do sell a lot of those. A lot. We are one of the biggest sellers of graphic novels in the country.
Right.
And they sell really, really well. People love them.
Anything in particular?
I'm not the I'm not the category manager for that, but the stuff that we sell a lot of manga. So people who are reading translations of Japanese manga, and there are particular series that sell extremely well that have very funny names that I don't remember the names of. And then there are also just traditional, you know, DC and Marvel comics that sell. Yeah.
In terms of Booktopia's interest in First Nations, I mean, I know Booktopia is not taking pitches directly, but do you have any publishers or agents that you could recommend that people would pitch their books to?
First Nations people?
Yeah.
At this stage, my sense is that the industry is hungry for high quality First Nations content. And I don't think that there's necessarily a singular agent who's good at this or bad at this. There are a couple I know of who publish some other people from First Nations backgrounds. I'm a little while out of the publishing industry, the publishing part of the publishing industry, so my contacts are not as up to date. But certainly I know that Curtis Brown is one of the biggest agencies in the country, and they have a handful of very successful Indigenous authors on their list. And I know of authors who can. I know of agents who are interested in publishing that sort of stuff. So anecdotally, I get the sense that there is an appetite. So I think it's worth the pitch.
Most publishers should be open to it.
I think so. These days, large publishers and agents are going to be interested. It doesn't mean that you're going to get published, but I think that I think publishers are trying to offset the discrimination that First Nations people face by being from First Nations. By trying to open the door a bit. I'm not saying that that's been 100% successful, and there are so many other roadblocks in place, but I think they are trying. And if anyone wants to get in contact with me via direct message on Twitter or something, do get in contact, and I will try and help you out if that's the case for you.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's at Joel Naoum.
Okay. In terms of, so here's another question. Knowing how difficult it is to get your book into mainstream publishing, what are the pluses and minuses of independent publishing?
Pluses and minuses. Well, look, you can publish much faster. You can publish what you want without interference, which is not always a good thing, but you can do it. And you can be in control of the whole experience and reap the rewards of it. You are also taking all the risk up front. If you invest money in self-publishing, you're taking all the risk. And you can prejudice publishers against you if you do it really badly. I certainly wouldn't recommend that you self-publish a book that you ultimately intend to traditionally publish, because it's really hard to make that transition with a specific book. I don't think many traditional publishers are interested in republishing books that are already self-published. If traditional publishing is what you want, keep pitching for it until you get it or give up. And there's nothing wrong with self-publishing after that, but generally don't do that. And don't try and publish a series, self-publish a series, and halfway through try and find a traditional publisher either.
Is it still hard to get independent books into booksellers, into traditional booksellers, physical ones with stores?
Yes, still quite difficult. As the aforementioned 5,000 books a month are quite overwhelming, and most independent bookshops, smaller bookshops, are not going to even look at that whole 5,000. They're not even considering that whole 5,000, because it's too many. So Booktopia certainly looks at everything that we get pitched, but it's hard to get in front of someone like me as an independent author, because there are just so many books, and the distributors and the publishers that pitch to us in bulk. It makes it a lot easier for them to tell us about a book. But generally speaking, the best way to get your book into bookshops is to do it the old-fashioned way and contact them and ask if you can put your book in with them, and do it in sale and return or commission terms, where you give them the book. If they sell it, they will give you the money. If not, they can give it back to you. That's how publishers work. That's generally how bookshops function. Booktopia doesn't really work that way because we don't sell books that way, but smaller bookshops and franchise bookshops may be open to being pitched that way if you do it in a professional way.
Right. Different topic. What are the most popular books in nonfiction at the moment? At least in your area.
Specific titles or?
Yeah,
books,
go on.
Just trends. Like, I mean,
it's up to you.
Well, one of the biggest, one of the biggest books of the past few months has been Phosphorescence by Julia Baird, which has sold amazingly well. It's a great read as well. She came in and signed some books for us, and we did a podcast, which was really, really fun. That book has just coincidentally landed in the middle of a pandemic, which was an extremely fortuitous timing. The book is about how to sort of get through darkness and find the silver lining in the darkness. And I think it's really really hit a nerve at the moment. I would also highly recommend some of the books that are selling really well at the moment on the back of the protest movements. Some of those books are absolutely cool. Basically, all of them that I've read a bit of so far are fantastic. Probably the top selling one at the moment is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It's a wonderful book, well worth reading for any person who is interested in that kind of thing. And Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad is also really good. I don't know, the general trends, I would never, when I was publishing books, there were general trends that we would talk about in publishing. And I used to say, and I would say that even more so now, do not try and write books for a trend. Current. By the time you have written a book and published it, it will be not current. The trend will have moved on.
So do you think there'll be a wash of COVID-themed books are coming?
It already is.
It's already happened?
Yeah, I don't think that people are going to be necessarily hugely interested in reading. I don't know. I'll be curious to see what the post-COVID books are like. We got pitched a book recently, which I've now forgotten the title of, so I'm not going to be able to remember what it is. But it was about, rather than being about the disease itself, we've had a lot of like very quickly published COVID books about the actual coronavirus and how it spreads and etc. And we've had some conspiracy theory books about how it's caused by 5G networks and stuff, which is always fun to see. The first book that I've had pitched that I thought, oh, there's something to that, is a book about politics, and it's about how this change in the culture of everyone working from home and huge amounts of unemployment and huge amounts of government spending might change the way that the country functions. And it's an anthology book edited, I believe it's edited by I've forgotten the name of the politician, and it's got a lot of very successful politicians and journalists contributing to it. That's the first book that I've seen that I thought from nonfiction that I thought, oh, that could do really well, because it's taking a different angle. But I'll be really curious to see what fiction gets published in the wake of COVID. I think that'll be really funny.
I've got a couple questions I'm going to roll together here. So yeah, do agencies help to get you published, and can they help you promote a self-published book? By agents, I presume they mean agents.
Can agents help you self-publish?
Can they promote a self-published book?
Agents don't do like promotion on its own. So if you get an agent, the purpose of an agent is to help you get traditionally published. That's their skill set. Their skill set is in having all the contacts with traditional publishers to be able to pitch your book, and they know what publishers are looking for at any given time. So they're on the hunt for stuff like that, and their job is as a middleman between you and a traditional publisher. So generally speaking, it's not in an agent's wheelhouse to help you promote your self-published book. I do know of agents who, once they had tried to get their author's book traditionally published, they helped them along the road to self-publishing. And I know of agents whose particular client may have written a book that they don't think is suitable for a traditional publishing market, who have, instead of rejecting it, they just help them self-publish it instead. That does happen. Generally speaking, it's not their core skill set, so I would say they're not going to be the best set up to do that, especially in Australia. I don't know of any agents in Australia who are really good at helping authors self-publish. They're usually going to direct them to people like me.
Well, that links to another question, to talk a little bit more about your upcoming course. What can people expect? What do they learn? What happens in your self-publishing course?
So the course, I find it really interesting and exciting. The premise of the course is to try and get people to get from the point of having a manuscript that is edited to actually publishing the book. So we go through the process steps of briefing and designing a cover, getting a book typeset, getting a book up for distribution with the major ebook and print-on-demand distributors. And then at the end of the process, the book is literally available for sale, and you can print off a copy with your print-on-demand printer and have it delivered to you. So it's a very practical course, taking you through the specific steps that you need to actually get your book published.
So you need your book ready to go before the course then?
Yeah, you need your book edited and proofread before the course. And if, assuming you plan on editing and proofreading it, which I highly recommend you do, it will make the whole process much easier if you do. But yeah, and if you are thinking about self-publishing and you've got a manuscript that you've been working on, or you've got a manuscript that you've tried to pitch to publishers and they haven't been interested, but you still would like to get it published, it might be the right thing to do, is to aim for the course, because it's a good way of learning some of the ropes when it comes to that type of thing. We cover a huge amount of ground in a small amount of time. Like it's really packed in.
Great. I think we're nearly out of time. I just got to say, the next First Friday Club is with Kirsten Krauss, author and longtime editor of Newsright. So everyone should look out to book in for that one. And then I'm going to ask Karen's question, who, even though she says it's a dinky question, it's the exact same question I had for you. Really, just big picture, your thoughts on the future of publishing in the next 5 years. What sort of change?
I mean, it's probably a bit self-centered, but I do think there is a shift towards online bookselling, and there's an overall trend away from physical bookshops towards online bookselling. And I think for a lot of authors and self-publishers in particular, that's going to level the playing field a little bit. Because a big part of what publishers bring to the process is access to physical bookshops. I don't think physical bookshops are going anywhere. I don't think they're going to die. I just think that there are a lot of people who sell books, and we know that the big discount department stores that sell books in Australia are declining. That's going to just change the way that publishers function in Australia. And I do think online is going to be a big part of that. So yeah, prepare yourself for an online world.
Yeah, we'll see, because it seems to change so much. Joel, thanks for your time today. Sorry to anyone whose questions we didn't get to answer. We might try and email you back if we can.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks Dave.
Joel. And thanks, Lou, for making this run so smoothly.
Thanks, everyone.